Welcome back to Man vs. Weed, the Spiky Greens Cannabis Review Podcast. I'm your host, Tango Hotel Charlie. Hope everybody's doing well. Last weekend I chopped down the last two of those Northern Lights autoflowers. Definitely the longest I've ever seen an autoflower take. However, the yield was massive and the buds are huge and sticky. They are now drying in a dark tent. Once those are all jarred up, I'm thinking about growing some Critical Daddy or maybe some Raspberry Cough. Just to follow up on the caramel story from last week, in case you missed it, a guy showed up in my mentions defending caramel pre-rolls like he lovingly hand-rolled each one himself. He then offered me a sample and told me to DM him. Now his account is set up so you can't DM him if you don't follow him. Incidentally, you can send him money whether you follow him or not, and I'm not sure why his account even has that feature. Anyway, I told him I couldn't DM, so he followed me to unlock the DM function, and I sent him my shipping address. In the DMs, he tried to make a deal to send me a free caramel pre-roll, on the condition I only spoke positively about it, and that I should keep any criticism off Twitter. I agreed to nothing, and told him that honesty is number one at Man vs. Weed. He said if I said anything negative, he would bill me. Then he threw in a JK at the end to cover his ass, as if that erased everything he said before. So I left it at that, and heard nothing from him. I unfollowed, as the only reason I followed in the first place was to DM my shipping info, so that he could send me this pre-roll he claimed would blow my mind. So as I mentioned, last week I spoke about it on the podcast, and friend of the show, Arkham Smoke, over at Buddstuff.club, brought it to the attention of Carmel on Twitter. Buddstuff.club, by the way, does great, honest cannabis reviews coupled with amazing photography. Go check it out. If you like my podcast, you'll dig their shit as well. Anyways, Arkham Smoke asked Carmel Cannabis if they were cool with this rep acting outside of their parameters and possibly outside the Cannabis Act itself. They also asked if leaning heavily on reviewers to force positive reviews or at the very least stifle negative ones was something Carmel Cannabis condones. Carmel Cannabis responded in 30 minutes. That seems rather prompt. They thanked Arkham for bringing it to their attention. They said that this is definitely not something that they endorse, and that they believe in the integrity of reviews and appreciate all kinds of feedback, as it allows them to improve as a company. They said that they would look into it and take appropriate action. Now, this PR rep just happens to be the communications director over at NORML. NORML is the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, or NORML. It's a national political organization that supports the removal of all criminal penalties for cannabis. Which is ironic since Vice President of NORML Deepak Anand once called for raids on illegal dispensaries that he viewed as eating up his profits at his legal company. Now this Carmel PR rep just happens to be the communications director at NORML. The NORML website claims he is a, quote, media maestro. Lol. It also says his wife works there and she's the secretary at NORML. I only bring that up because after the folks at Carmel Cannabis made their statement, the PR guy's wife showed up on Twitter bragging about her law degree and how it's perfectly legal for an adult to gift another adult cannabis. Of course, she conveniently left out the fact that said adult is a PR guy for the LP he was trying to force a positive review for using free product. She also went on to say that she advised against sending me the pre-roll, not because it's unethical to force positive reviews, but because my shitty little podcast doesn't have a large enough audience to bribe. So there it is. Only buy positive reviews from podcasts with a large enough audience. Got it. That law degree was worth every penny. She said that when he attempted to bribe a good review from me that he was just trying to be a nice guy. That guy that I didn't know, we didn't follow each other, never had an interaction, just wanted to be my buddy. When called on how greasy it was, she responded, "Don't hate the player, hate the game." Cringe. You would think this would be enough, but there was more. So, the PR guy goes on to say he was going to send me an exclusive, never-been-released product. But after exposing him, I get nothing. He also said that this was all taken out of context. Then he straight up lied and said that I asked him to follow me on Twitter. Then accused me of manipulating screenshots to make him look bad. I responded by immediately posting full untouched screenshots of every interaction, and once again exposed him as a liar. Media maestro. Anyways, so he said it's not his job to send people gifts out of his pocket, and that it was funny because he was going to send me a product that hasn't been released yet. Arkham Smoke correctly called that out as exceptionally wrong considering it was not even for sale yet, and the PR guy responded by questioning Arkham's intelligence, stating the reason he didn't send it to me was because it was unreleased. So he said he was going to send me a product that was unreleased but didn't because it wasn't released. Does that make sense? It shouldn't. If you haven't noticed, it's clear at this point that he's flailing. He then calls us trolls for calling him out and whines about being harassed. Hilarious. It's at this point I see him going back and forth with another cannabis reviewer. This cannabis reviewer seems a little too concerned about how all this might be perceived, that it might look like other reviewers were taking these deals, that this PR guy played right into my, quote, shtick. My shtick? That shtick he's referring to is me calling out all the underhanded deals in the legal cannabis industry, from greedy culture vultures with shell companies and fake doctorates, to shill reviewers and stock boys on the take. So if that's threatening to you or you think that's shtick, it's probably because you're one of the shitbags I talk about. So much commotion for a shitty little podcast with no audience. Right, no audience? So today's cannabis sample is Island MK Ultra by Aaron's BC Bud. Information is a little tight on this one. Even just looking at their website was a chore. For some reason when I selected my province to access their site, it would just hang. I tried multiple devices and browsers and even a PC, and I got the same thing. Eventually I tried different provinces and that worked. Hilarious though that I couldn't get BC to work since they have BC right in their name. But finding information was also somewhat difficult because of the whole multi-level marketing thing. So Aaron's BC Bud was owned by United Greeneries. United Greeneries was owned by Harvest One. Harvest One is owned by MMJ Group Holdings. Except Harvest One started tanking. And when they started tanking, they started cutting costs and selling assets. Insiders started pumping up stocks, including ex-Loblaws CEO and CEO of Harvest One at the time, Grant Freeze. He came out of retirement to pocket a fat salary. He encouraged shareholders to invest in the bloated stock before dipping with the bag and leaving investors with the bill. Sounds familiar. He resigned about 2 years after taking the position of CEO at Harvest One. Since he had no experience with cannabis, he was unable to transfer his skills gained from the grocery industry to profitability in the cannabis industry. This is just one of the many pitfalls you encounter when you only employ culture vultures and ignore the folks that fought for legalization and that you hope to buy your product. Harvest One didn't like the whole not making money thing, so they decided to focus on the consumer packaged goods racket instead. They have pivoted to the health food wellness scam game. Instead, they now sell something called Dream Water. Dream Water is a Health Canada approved sleep aid drink which is made of melatonin, GABA, and 5-HTP. GABA, or gamma-aminobutyric acid, is a neurotransmitter that blocks impulses in the brain, and it may be linked to anxiety, mood disorders, epilepsy, and chronic pain. They have tried to use GABA for everything from burning fat and increasing growth of lean muscle mass, to pain relief, lower blood pressure, increased tolerance to exercise, PMS, ADHD, and moods. Yet there is very little data showing whether or not it works for the many reasons people take it. In fact, it's unlikely that a supplement is even a large enough dose to reach the brain. And 5-HTP works in the brain and central nervous system by increasing the production of serotonin. It has been shown to improve depression in some people. Its most common side effects include heartburn, stomach pain, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, drowsiness, muscle problems, and erectile dysfunction, with large doses of 6 to 10 grams daily being unsafe. These doses have been linked to severe stomach problems and muscle spasms. I don't know about you, but I think I'll skip the Dream Water and just smoke some weed. I digress. What was I? Oh, right. So when Harvest One decided to pivot to the wellness scam, they sold United Greeneries to an LP called Costa Canna back in 2020 for $8.2 million. Costa Canna is owned by Cowichan Tribes. Cowichan Tribes is the largest First Nations band in British Columbia with around 5,000 members. They operate multiple cannabis retail outlets on Vancouver Island as well. This is interesting because typically, the Cannabis Control and Retail Act doesn't allow businesses to operate in both the cannabis production and the retail sectors. They claim that this is to protect the retail market from being dominated by a small number of large producers. Fail. This deal, only a second of its kind, the first being the Williams Lake First Nation back in September 2020, allows the Cowichan Tribes to be able to both produce and sell cannabis. This is a special one-year agreement with the province. How it works is the BCLCDB, or BC Liquor Cannabis Distribution Board, is the only entity that retail stores, both private and government, can purchase cannabis from in BC. So Cowichan Tribes grows the cannabis in Duncan, sells it to the BC Liquor and Cannabis Distribution Branch, then buys it back, packages it, and sells it back to you. Cowichan Tribe's chief William Seymour said they won't have to pay the provincial rate for cannabis, so their costs will be lower. They are looking to extend that one-year deal later this year. Shut the fuck up and talk about weed? Okay. According to Aaron's BC Bud, their cannabis is all organic, grown with no pesticides or chemicals, just pure natural spring water. By the way, if you're wondering who Aaron is, Aaron was a goat that lived on their farm. He's dead now. This 3.5 gram sample came in a stupid plastic jar. That jar was dated July 23, 2021. It has 24% THC, and according to the website, it has 2.6% terpenes, with the top 3 being eucalyptol, listed as mint, carene, listed as sweet, and beta-pinene, listed as pine. It is an indica dominant if you're trained to believe that matters. This sample was $37 for an eighth, which works out to $10.60 per gram, or a ridiculous $296 an ounce, which easily breaks $300 after tax. So much for cutting costs, huh? And if they did cut costs, they certainly ain't passing the savings on to you. $300 an ounce is robbery, and if you think otherwise, you're a mark or a shill. Island MK Ultra is a cross between OG Kush and G13. It was packaged on July 23, 2021, making it only a month and a half since it was packaged at the time of this recording. The buds come packed with a moisture pack. When I stick my nose in the jar, pine is my first impression. Terpenes are so few and far between on the legal market that it's nice to smell. This eighth easily had the best bag appeal of any sample I have reviewed to date, with the majority of the jar being filled with decent-sized buds, and one bud that was about the size of a golf ball. This is completely unheard of in my experience. Also, the buds were actually nice and fresh, moist, soft, and dense. The bud structure probably was the best I've reviewed in the legal market, period. You can squish the flowers in your fingers and they're soft and spongy, and they don't burst into dust. They're still not very sticky though. On the scale, it came to exactly 3.5 grams. Under the microscope, however, is where it loses points. The trichomes are gloopy and corroded, with the heads looking burst and damaged. Healthy trichome heads will be full, round, and shiny. These are dull, deflated, and opaque. The headless trichome stalks were also small and not as dense as you'd like to see. Aside from that, there was the odd black speck and another black microfiber. I gotta be honest though, I didn't find any more black fibers, but one is enough for me, and I didn't spend a lot of time looking for more. Since I'm smoking it either way, I'd kinda rather not know. The buds are mostly shades of dark and light greens, with some orange hairs and possibly some dark purple flecks. The buds are relatively well trimmed with very little excess stem and leaf. To me, the Island MK Ultra smells very tangy, earthy, and piney. I feel the pine is more to the sweet, tangier side, rather than like a pine sol cleaner, and it has an earthy finish. I used my grinder to break it up because it's not dry as fuck. I'd recommend scissors or a grinder for this one because it's much more difficult to break up with your fingers. Grinding it up releases more of those sweet, piney terpenes. I rolled a gram into a raw organic paper. Before I lit it, I took a dry puff and it tasted like black licorice. I figure that's the eucalyptol. Some might call it mint. Tasted more like black licorice to me. Right away after the first hit, the harsh smoke had me choking. I don't tend to cough a lot from good quality cannabis, but this was quite harsh, and it didn't get better. It stayed consistently harsh all the way through. The heavy smoke retained the earthy flavor from the raw flower more than anything else to me. It burned evenly with no sparkles or relights. However, the ash wasn't great. It ranged from salt and pepper at best to dark gray at worst. When I breathed the smoke through my nose, I noticed a slight stickiness in my nose hairs. Not a lot, but enough that I noticed. This might seem like a strange observation, however I've noticed high quality, high potency cannabis will make my nose hairs sticky. This wasn't quite that, but it was nice to see. At first the high was fairly average and mid-range, but within 10 minutes or so it crept up a bit to a more heady, stony sensation. It was, however, fairly short-lived at about an hour or so. So, is this a recommend? The pros are freshness, bud structure, and terpenes. The cons are damaged trichomes, contaminants, harsh smoke, and high price. For me, the price is a real killer. On the legal market, damaged trichomes and contaminants are par for the course, but the higher price point requires exponentially higher standards. At $300 an ounce, there's absolutely no room for error. Maybe in the future they can bring that price down and clean up the quality control. Unfortunately for them, in the meantime, there are cheaper, better quality options on the legacy market. Thanks again for sticking around for another episode of Man vs. Weed. Without you, I'm just another asshole with a podcast. I appreciate your continued support. As always, make sure to like, subscribe, review, and share the damn thing. Every little bit helps. Find me on Twitter at StreetVillain, and if you have any questions, contact me at manversusweedthc@gmail.com. But if you don't feel like doing anything but smoking weed, I'm cool with that too. So keep doing what the fuck you're doing, keep listening, stay high as fuck, and free the weed.